Okay, so we're going to continue. We started last week on Mem Vav Amen Aleph, the bottom. I'm going to quickly just go through that because it's important for the continuation. But our discussion last week went back to the question of whether a matbeya can be used for chalipin. We go back to that seemingly again and again, even though we slug it up and we have not yet had a conclusive proof that you can. The Gemara keeps probing to see whether or not money can be used for chalipin. So today we're going to continue that, and there's a few curveballs that we're going to see that come up from this discussion. So 4 lines from the bottom on Mem, Vav, and Aleph. I'm going to quickly just review what we discussed so that the today's shiur can continue seamlessly. All right, so we had a Toshima. The Gemara again wanted to say, remember last week I read somewhat extensively from the Mishnah in Kedushin for us to fully understand what that Mishnah was talking about. So, Toshima, this is from that Mishnah. Kolanasa damim ba'acher. So anybody who uses, when they say damim ba'acher, it means using money for an exchange. Generally, it doesn't say chalipin. It means ba'acher, using money for something else. So then the Gemara says, so we deduce that since the person is zocher with the money, this so you see that money can be used from chalipin, from that Mishnah. So the Gemara asks, what does it mean? Because it's sort of cryptic. My nihu, says the Gemara there, matbeya. So very simply, from the Mishnah in Kedushin, we wanted to deduce, since the language said that you could use damim ba'acher for something else, and that something else turns out to be an exchange for an item. So that's on its very rudimentary level. The Mishnah comes to tell us that you can use money for chalipin. Very simple. I mean, we've said no, you can't, and here the Mishnah seems to say you can. So then immediately we said, Rabbi Yehuda, a very bottom line, Rabbi Yehuda, Hachi Ka'amar. It was Man Vavam and Beis at the top. No, it doesn't mean money. Kol Hanishum Domim Ba'acher. If you evaluate or you assess money for something else, meaning you do an assessment of an item, or an appraisal is a better word. You do an appraisal of an item to see how much it's worth. So he says, so Rabbi Yehuda immediately wants to say, no, we're not talking about money in that Mishnah. We're talking about appraising something for money and then using that item as an exchange. Now, that item is not money, so you can't prove that it's money that is actually being used for chalipin, because we're talking about appraising. Let's say you have a very nice piece of china and you want to exchange it for something. But how much is it worth? So you do an appraisal, nishum bedamim, you do an appraisal, and you say, oh, it's worth $1,000, fine, then this piece of china I can exchange something, let's say ballpark, that's in that neighborhood. So therefore, Yehuda says right away, no, it's no raya that money can be used for chalipin, because we're still talking about an item. Now, and then now that Mishnah that says hachinam and mistabra, and it's logical to think that way. Why? Because it says in the Mishnah there, Mediktani Seifa, the second half of that Mishnah in Kedushin, which we read last week, it says Keitzad Hichlip. What is Keitzad? What's an example of what you just said? Hichlip Shor Bapara. If someone exchanges an ox for a cow, or a Hamor B'Shor, or a donkey for a ox, Shema Mina. So we see that those are items that can be exchanged, and it's not money. So we learned 2 things from that. We learned, one, that you can't use money, but we also learned that you don't have to use a utensil. Because remember, we've been saying for the longest time, certainly for several blot, that the source of chalipin is from the Megillah of Rus, where we talk about the Noah, where they exchanged a shoe. What is a shoe? So the identification of a shoe is that it's a utensil. Okay, so at least we learned from that pasuk that you need a utensil for chalipin. Comes this Mishnah now and is showing us you can't use money, but you don't need an utensil either. Because if you can exchange a shor for a chamor, neither a shor or chamor is a utensil. Those are what we'll call in the larger sense produce. So then it's produce meaning any movable, metaltal, any movable that's not a utensil is considered produce, for better or for worse. So we bring a raya, A, that you can't use money, and B, that you can use produce and you don't have to use the utensil, which is what the pasuk says. So those are the proofs that we bring from this Mishnah. Okay? And then we said after that, but according to the interpretation of the Mishnah, not Rabbi Yehuda, but the first interpretation of the Mishnah, where we said that it means a coin. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda said it means nishum, it means an appraisal equal to a coin, but not the coin itself. But the original interpretation of the Mishnah was that it was a coin. My Ketzad. If it was a coin, then what does the Mishnah, the Gemara they say, or the Mishnah say, my, it says Ketzad. What's an example of the coin? Is Hachikama Upeirenamne of the Chalipin. The Chiddush is that Peira, it doesn't mean money, it means that produce, Peira, produce, can be used for Chalipin. How do you know? Ketzad, Ichel Shor B'Parah, Chamor B'Shor, then, so you see that you can exchange a chamor for a shor. You don't have to have a utensil. You can have a produce. So regardless of whether you interpret it that it means matbeya, coin, or nishum domim, or an appraisal for a coin, that's that machlokes there between, let's say, the Tanna Kamma and Rabbi Yehuda. But we extrapolate from that you can have a peira, produce, a movable, other than a utensil, for chalipin, and that's our takeoff point for what we're doing today. So we see that no matter how you slice it, a produce item, a non-utensil, can be used for chalipin. That's the bottom line of what that Mishnah wants to teach us. Now we're going to get into what we want to start today, about 1, 2, 3, 6 lines from the top. So if you're going to say that produce is good for chalipin, says the Gemara, the omepera of the chalipin. There's a machlokes which we're going to encounter in another blot or so between Rav Sheshes and Rav Nachman. Rav Sheshes says pera of the chalipin, but Elul Rav Nachman Omer kli in avopera lo of the chalipin. My Ketzad. According to Rav Nachman, in this machlokes amaroim between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes, Rav Sheshes says pera can be used for chalipin, no problem. Rav Nachman says no way. It says in the pasuk noal. Noal means a utensil. That's what it means. You can only use a utensil for chalipin, but not pera, not produce. And by produce we mean a definition of any other item which is not a utensil, or money. So we have 3 categories: money, which we're saying you can't use, pera, and noal, utensil. So machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes has nothing to do with money. It has simply to do with Rav Sheshes says pera, meaning any metaltalin you can use for chalipin, and Rav Nachman says no, it has to be utensil because of the pasuk. So in this machlokes, it's okay. And the way we just interpreted the Mishnah comes up perfectly like Rav Sheshes, because Rav Sheshes says produce, and the example in the Mishnah is shor b'para or shor b'chamor. That's produce. Those are movable items, non-utensil. But according to Rav Nachman, the Mikli and the lo of the Chalipin, my Ketzad, you're going to tell me Ketzad, and what's an example? And you're going to give me an example of shor b'chamor, which is not a utensil. How does that come out according to Rav Nachman? So we have a problem according to Rav Nachman, right? How do you reconcile? If Rav Nachman says that you have to have a utensil, so he says that okay, so you're going to try to exchange demei shor, meaning the demei shor b'para. You're exchanging the monetary value of a para, and for a monetary value of a ox. Now, you're not exchanging the item but you're exchanging a monetary value for each. So, the Gemara, my Talmud, Rav Nachman. So, in other words, Rav Nachman gives the following example. We're going to see it in Rashi in more detail. Rav Nachman is coming to tell us that you can exchange the value of a chamor for the value of a shor. What's the example? I sell you, Jay, I'm going to sell you an ox. And the ox is $100, and you're going to pay me $100. But before you pay me the $100, you say, you know what, Tuvia, I have a chamor. If you're in the market for a chamor, I can give you a chamor. And I say, you know what, it just so happens I need a chamor. So you're going to give me a chamor. But wait a minute, you were going to give me money. You were going to give me $100. Now you're substituting the chamor for the $100. So it turns out this is a twist of the idea of using money by saying, you know what, I'm going to pay you money for that. But instead of paying you money, I'm going to give you a chamor. So I'm going to exchange a shor for a chamor. But in so doing, I'm going to basically exchange it for the money, but I'm not getting the money. So this, Rav Nachman says, is a raya. It's a raya that you can use money for chalipin. Why? Because I was going to give you the $100. Instead of giving you the $100, I'm now giving you the chamor. So that, according to Rav Nachman, means that I have sort of liquidated or exchanged the money for a chamor, and I'm allowed to do it. So in a sort of backhanded way, that's chalipin with money, because you used the money, but you didn't give me the money, you gave me the chamor. Yeah, Jay.
Does this imply that there has to be a certain time delay between this transaction? Because at least word-wise, he says, okay, I'll give you money. And then say, oh, by the way, I have a chamor. I mean, it has to be some amount of seconds or whatever to separate both transactions rather than...
That's an excellent question. And Rashi anticipates the question by saying, since in slow motion, you can do this transaction, like you're saying, with the money, so let's speed up the transaction and let's make it simultaneous, but it's as if he was going to give him money. So the answer is no, you don't have to wait a period of time, but you have to go through the machinations in your mind by saying, I'm really exchanging shor for money, but since you want to take the chamor, we don't pay the money. So in fast forward, it's happening at one time, but it's still happening if you want to break it down as an exchange of money, but in lieu of money, it's a chamor.
Somebody is saying, splitting that moment, he's saying, therefore, there's proof that you can use money.
That's exactly right. It's a proof you could use money because you were about to use money and you simultaneously said, but I'm giving you a chamor. And I said, sure, fine, I'll take the chamor. So now the exchange of the shor chamor looks like an exchange of two items, but there was a blip in that exchange where you were going to give me money and you exchanged the money for the chamor, and that's what makes the transaction. So from that, says Rav Nachman, I want to be able to deduce that you can use money for chalipin.
There's no
it's
words
a whole new way of thinking of chalipin with money.
Right. But there's no words taking place. This is all machshava of two people.
All machshava. It's all.
Well, how does he derive? How does he?
But Rashi says
say that machshava is good enough for
we say machshava kamaisa, that there's a cloud that in many instances machshava kamaisa, that your thinking is the happening. You're thinking about it and you're instantly making it happen. It's like simultaneous. So let's look at the Rashi, but that's what this new twist is, that money can be used for chalipin because you're basically simultaneously exchanging money for the item that you're making chalipin, but that's proof positive that you could use money. That's how the Gospel wants to interpret it. So it's a different way of thinking about money, because it's not just stam money. It's money that is being in the same breath being exchanged for an item, which is one item for another, and that shows that money can be used. That's his theory. Let's look at Rashi.
Rabbi,
Okay.
I don't understand something. If I owe you for an ox, what is the difference? If you're in agreement that I'll give you something in substitute for, why are they making such a big thing about it?
Because David, normally, if I sell you an ox and you give me money, that's a sale. That's not an exchange. It's not chalipin. You're basically buying the ox for $100. Simple.
Yeah, but what's the difference between an exchange or a sale? I mean, it's between you and me.
Okay, good question.
It's an agreement. I'm supposed to pay you. Hey, listen, I'll pay you in gold, I'll pay you in silver, I'll pay you in diamonds, whatever it is.
Right.
I happen to have a cow. Do you want, or a donkey? I'll pay you the donkey.
Okay, right. So let me tell you the difference. The difference, as we understand it, is that in an exchange, remember what we said at the very beginning on Daf Mem Daled when we started this whole discussion. We said that if I sell you something, and you are going to get the money, and I'm going to get the chayfetz. In order to conclude the transaction, I have to do a kinyan on the chayfetz. If you do a kinyan on the money, it's not good enough. The chayfetz, the produce, the item has to be the first one to be received, meaning hagbah, meshicha. We have to do some kind of physical act. For me, I'm selling you a diamond. I've got to take the diamond and lift it or take it. Then you get the money. But if you'd said, "Oh, you're giving me the money, but the diamond's still in your possession," the deal has not been concluded yet. I still need to get that diamond in order to conclude the deal.
So is that the underlying issue here? Is that the real underlying issue here?
Yes.
Finalizing the transaction.
Yes, that's the underlying issue. Is the difference between a sale and an exchange is if I were exchanging that diamond for another item, then the minute I take the diamond, you get the item, even if it's in Timbuktu and you don't even have a chance to get it, it's yours. But in a sale, it's never yours until you actually make the hagbah or the meshicha. So the major difference here is that in a sale, both sides, the money side and the item side, have to make a kinyan. They have to receive it. In a chalipin, one person's kinyan automatically makes the other person owner without a kinyan. You don't both have to make a kinyan. You don't both have to make a symbolic or an actual event of taking it or lifting it or whatever, right?
Why is it so important not to have those things?
You know why it's important. So the Gemara tells us, and we'll see it again, is if it wasn't that way with money, then let's say I got your money and you're supposed to get my item. Once I get the money, if it's already automatically yours and it's still in my possession, what happens if there's a fire and the item gets burned? Who takes the loss? If you have to make a kinyan and you haven't, I take the loss because it's my item and it's still in my possession and the fire happened in my possession. But if you say that it's already a reciprocal kinyan, then you're going to take the loss. Says the Gemara, you're going to take the loss. The fire is in my possession. I have no incentive of putting out the fire because it's not mine. It's yours. If it's an automatic that you get it without making the kinyan, then the risk is that I'm going to not do anything to save the item because it's not mine. If it's automatically yours. Therefore, the Gemara says, in a case of monetary purchase, you better save that item because if the item gets burned, you take the loss and the whole transaction is null and void. That's the only way to protect the other guy. In Chalipin, it's not that way. In Chalipin, once one person makes the exchange, the kinyan, other person is automatically the owner. Therefore, there is a difference, a substantial difference between a sale and a kinyan. So now,
one's more in trust than the other one is more as a commercial loan or something.
Right, which is why we go to such great lengths. The Gemara is going to such great lengths to see, well, if Chalipin works and we're not worried about one guy protecting the other guy, then let's find a way to make money Chalipin, and therefore there won't be a problem. So this is what the whole probe of the Gemara is to say, since money is different than Chalipin, let's somehow make money Chalipin. And once we make money Chalipin, then we'll be at a par, right? Two items exchange or money in an item, no difference. And that's
Okay, what happens? Well, then I give you a donkey. 2 days later, it dies.
Right. Well, okay, but that's the risk you take. I mean,
Well, isn't that the same thing? If you say, hey, listen, I have a diamond, but I have a donkey in Texas. I'll give it to you. I got to bring it up here. Is the agreement made or not? I'm making a chalikim with you. I'll trade you my donkey for your cow.
right.
I got to bring it up to you. It's in Texas.
No, you don't have to bring it up because automatically it's yours. And you have to make arrangements to make sure that that donkey is safe. Now, if the donkey dies, so then that opens up a whole can of worms of whether or not there was a pre-existing condition. If it died suddenly, then you're out of luck. You're out of luck. I mean, it's like.
But also using that example of, we exchange it, but I got to bring it up to you. Well,
Now,
if the exchange takes place right away, even though I'm now bringing it up to you, it's already yours. And so if I have an accident on the trip and the animal dies, I'm liable to replace it for you or to pay you for it or something.
No, if I'm bringing it up for you, so I'm your shomer because I'm bringing it up, then it's a question of shomer. If it's a shomer chinam, shomer sachar.
Right, yeah.
But let's say you bring it up. It's now your donkey. You bring it up, and on the way up, it dies. But that's no different than any transaction. So then you look at the transaction and say, was there a problem to begin with? If there was, then of course it's a mekach tos. It's a not. But if there was no problem, it was a healthy ox, a accident, and just dropped dead in the middle of nowhere 2 days later, then farfallen. I mean, then you've lost. Unfortunately, you've lost. But you can't account for that. But the whole point here is that if we're making a distinction between exchanging two items or exchanging money for an item, we're trying to see that we're trying to make money be equivalent to an item so that both transactions should be at a par. But yet we constantly fail because we're constantly showing that damim cannot be used in chalipin. So in this particular exercise that the Gemara is that we're now learning, we want to be able to say, you know what? We have found a way to make money work for chalipin. How? Through this kind of you want to call it a ruse, or you want to call it where you're going to pay money, so it looks like a purchase, but instead of paying money, you instantly exchange it for another item. So therefore, it becomes a chalipin, a case of chalipin, not a case of purchase. But nevertheless, money sort of lurks in the transaction because you are about to pay money. So Nachman is telling us that I conclude that money, which you're now in a heartbeat exchanging for an item, that money is considered chalipin. And like Jay asked, does there have to be a hiatus? No, there doesn't have to be a hiatus because in your mind, and again, chalipin and damin is what you speak out. It's what you really identify. I mean, you can say all day long, this is a sale, but I'm telling you it's not a sale, it's an exchange. Okay, so the Gemara says, okay, now let's identify the ingredients to see whether or not it is a sale or it is an exchange. Comes Rav Nachman and says, my particular example here is not a sale. It was going to be a sale, but it's not a sale. It's chalipin, and money was part of that transaction. So I bring a raya that money can be used for chalipin. It is a little bit of a stretch, no question about it, because at the end of the day, you know, the money wasn't exchanged. So you want to ask yourself, well, if the money wasn't exchanged, why is money even involved? The answer is because I was going to use the money for the shore, and then I automatically just said to myself, no, I'd rather not take the money. I'd rather take the chamor. So in Rav Nachman's view, and we're gonna explore that just in a minute. So I don't want to get stopped here. But so in Rav Nachman's view, that switcheroo, if you will, between money and chamor is what makes it chalipin. So let's stop a minute. Let's look at the Rashis because
Michael, you're muted.
the Rashi may be complete. All right.
Michael, you're
Rabbi,
muted.
I want to make one point. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
So there have been a number of runs taken at this idea that, and we've come out every time saying that if it's money, can only be involved in a sale. An exchange, chalifin cannot involve money. This is a ruse, as you said, to get around that. It's still so. If you want to use money instead, it's a sale. If you substitute something and you're going to make an exchange, it's an exchange. You can't then say I'm substituting money for this right here and make it an exchange, because we've learned time after time, every run at this was that it was money cannot be involved. So why does Rav Nachman somehow feel that this is he can get around it this way? Because we've tried this before.
Excellent question. So we're gonna have to wait a few minutes to go through, and you'll see what Rav Nachman's source is. Okay, the Gemara will attempt to give us a source for Rav Nachman. So let's hold off, Michael. It's a good question, but let's just hold off just a few minutes until we get to that particular point, because we're going to see who Rav Nachman holds like to be able to say that. Rav Nachman doesn't do it on his own. He does it because he's hanging his hat on a source. So let's stop for a minute. Okay, let's just look at Rashi first. I think we have to catch up a little bit. So the Rashi, Henichal Rab Sheshes, right? It's partway down in the narrow lines. It says Henichal Rab Sheshes, meaning that this Gemara that we're talking about is okay according to Rab Sheshes, because Rab Sheshes is Peira of the Chalipin, that produce can be used for Chalipin. Remember in the discussion of whether you have to have a utensil, that's the machlokes between Rab Sheshes and Rav Nachman. So Rashi said, Bein Lamai de Salek Adatin Mi'ikara, Bein Lamai de Shana Rabbi Yehuda, whether you use the first interpretation that we meant actual money, or Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation that we meant an appraisal, right? There were two ways of looking at it. Sefer the Masnisan, the second half of the Mishnah, Ashmeinam, the Peira of the Chalipin, Lo being in Kli. How do we know that? Because that's the Sefer has to do with the exchange of the shor and the para, and that clearly isn't a utensil. So Rashi is telling us that regardless of whether you use the initial interpretation of the Mishnah, which said money, or the Rabbi Yehuda interpretation, which said Nishum Damim, which meant an appraisal, either way, they relied on the Sefer, and the Sefer was shor, b'chamor, which is Peira. So there's no question that according to Rav Sheshes, Peire, meaning produce of the Chalipin, below being in Kli. The high plukta to Rav Nachman, Rav Sheshes, the machlokes in Rav Nachman, Rav Sheshes, come Mishmaitzim is another dot in Mem Zayin. We'll see it shortly. Okay, so in other words, that's the machlokes, and that's why Rav Sheshes agrees and Rav Nachman doesn't. Now, here's our Gemara. So my Ketzad, so the Ketzad is as yesh damim shehem bechlipin, that there is money in chalipin according to Rav Nachman, that's our discussion now. Rashi, Reisha v'Sefer chodehi. He's saying the Reisha and the Sefer of that Mishnah in Kedushin is one. V'ashmeinon the yesh Torah's damim, that there is a situation of money shahamos konos below meshicha kechalipin shel suda. So again, what are we trying to say? I'm saying using the word ruse, but I want to be careful because I don't want it to sound like it's a trick. According to Rav Nachman, it's a legitimate form of exchange. Again, let me read the Rashi. The yesh Torah's damin, it is money. It is Torah's damin. Shahamos konos below Mashicha, kechalipin shel suder. The money is kone without Mashicha, without any kind of Mashicha, kechalipin shel suder. Okay, how? Let's take a look, Rashi. Ketzad hichlik demei shor b'para. He exchanges the monetary value of shor b'para. So here's the example. Mochalo shor b'kach mos. I'm selling you, Michael, a shor for $100. Kach b'kach mos, $100. We're making it up, $100. Well, Moshe has a shor, and you do Mashicha on the shore, right? You pull it, and it's chayiv lo hamos. Once you pull it, then you machayev to give me the money, right? Stop instant in time. I give you the shore. You take the shore, you pull it. That's Mashicha. Now you got to give me money. That looks like a sale. No question, that looks like a sale. Okay, weiter. Omale halokeya. The buyer, me. I say I'm buying your shore, and I say to you, Para yeshli, I have a cow. Shani nosim loch b'demei hashor. You know what? I'm going to give you a cow for the shore that I just bought from you with money, but I haven't given you the money yet. I bought it for money. I haven't given you the money. Instead of the money, I'm going to give you a para, right? B'demei shor. V'diyoso yachad. And it'll occur simultaneous. The kibul alav, he will accept upon himself this chayiv balapara losislo es apara. So immediately upon saying that I'm going to give you the apara, I take upon myself the responsibility of the gate to give you the para. Ve'ein echer vehem yochel lachzor, and neither of them can retract, because in chalipin, remember, it's automatic. Let me stop before you go, Michael. I made the Mashicha. I already made the Mashicha. I already pulled my cow. It's mine. Now, instead of giving you the money, I'm saying I'm giving you a chamor. You need to do nothing with that chamor, because that chamor is now in Chalipin automatically yours, regardless of what you do with it. Let me just finish. Anybody who evaluates the money, in other words, you do an appraisal, it's called hametalvim she'odam, call hametalvim, all movable objects she'odam sham l'chavelo, that a person gives to his friend, the nosen lo, right? Shumas demeyem, he gives the value of the money b'shvil chayfetz acher shehoyalo, which he did with the para. Since the first lokeach was zocher with metalkalim, horishonim, shebamashkam, because the metalkalim was the ox that he pulled. Even though it is betoras damim, it is in the sort of in the sphere of money. Al manas lahaknos lo chaypet shalo bedamim. Ischayev zeh lokeach sheni. So what are we talking about? So again, in slow motion, we're talking about, I sell you a shore, Mike, and you're going to give me the money. I'm going to give you the money because I'm taking the shore. I take the shore. I haven't given you the money. I take the shore of the Mashiach. I then say to you, but I have a chamor. Don't you need a chamor or a para? And you say, of course I need a para. So you immediately acquire the para without having done anything, because it's chalipin and I've acquired the shore. And the principle of chalipin is that the first person to do the acquisition, the Mashicha, automatically the other guy, that you, in this case, are the owner of the chamor. Now, wait a minute, but I was going to give you money. Damin. We're saying that the equivalent of money, right? The nishum damin, the equivalent of the money is what you now have acquired. But if you've acquired the equivalent of the money, then it's as if the money was exchanged for the para, and therefore it's a valid chalipin. Says Rav Nachman, that's why I can say that money can be used for chalipin, because that money instantaneously became a para, it became a cow, right? Magically, it became a cow, and the cow is yours through chalipin. Go ahead, you don't like it.
Rabbi, it's a separate transaction. They're both sales. The first one is a sale with a promise to pay. Instead, he comes in with a second transaction and says, I have a chamor you want. So the $100 I owed you, instead, I'm going to give you a chamor and sell that $100 to you. It's not an exchange. It's two separate purchases. It's two separate sales.
Right. Agreed. Because it's either got to be two separate sales, or the decision has to be made before the first chalipin.
Okay, so now I mean, in theory, you're all exactly correct. Now let's go from this Rashi back to the Gemara, because I wanted to enunciate the Rashi first. Now go back to the Gemara. The Gemara says what we were in the middle of my Talmud Rav Nachman. Okay, so we're saying, so how does it reconcile? It reconciles according to Rav Sheshes, because he talks about Paris. But Rav Nachman says, Paris, you can't make chalipin. How do you make chalipin? Says Rav Nachman, yesh domim shehenka chalipin. There is money that is like chalipin. Ketzad hichlus d'meishor b'paro d'meichamor b'shor. That's the example I just gave. And you're saying it can't be because they're separate transactions. Look at the next line. My Talmud Rav Nachman. What's Rav Nachman's reasoning? Why does he say that this is a valid transaction, even though you're flipping money for an item? Take a look. Because Rav Nachman Savar, Rav Nachman, because he holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Nachman holds like Rabbi Yochanan, the Omar, the Torah Ma'os Konos. That midaraisa, according to the Torah, money can be used for a acquisition, for a chalipin. It can be used. Remember, it's only the Rabbanan. The rabbis came and they made this siyag, they made this condition. Why? Which I said before, because if you're going to use money for chalipin, then you may have a situation where you make the exchange, a fire burns the produce, and the guy and the person who took the money says, "Not my problem. You were kind of the produce the minute I got the money." Because midaraisa, you're allowed to do that. Midaraisa, money can be koneh. So if money can be koneh, then you run the risk of the produce being harmed while it's still in the rishus of the seller who gets the money. That was the whole problem to begin with. Therefore, the Rabbanan said, no, money can't be koneh because for that reason, because of the problem with the produce. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, you can. Rav Nachman holds like Rabbi Yochanan that money is a valid form of exchange. So everything we have said now, this quote unquote ruse, okay, the way I described it, the underpinning of that is that you can use money for chalipin. So this whole ruse kind of isn't a ruse because the money itself can be used for chalipin. Therefore, I can exchange the money for a para or for a chamor because money can be used for chalipin. So, Michael, who you're very skeptical about the whole question that it looks like two separate transactions of sales, the answer is it's not a sale because according to Rabbi Yochanan, money can be used for chalipin, midoraisa.
But Rabbi, koneh means purchase. It's a purchase. It's not an exchange. The literal translation of koneh, is that not mean purchase?
Exactly right.
But even if we say that a purchase and an exchange are fundamentally the same, and therefore it's allowed, it still should be in this instance two different exchanges. And so the first exchange is I move the animal or I pull the animal or whatever. Okay, that's one exchange. And that's supposed to be for the other guy's money. Fine. So he does, rather for the other guy's animal. Fine. But instead, rather, no, it was going to be for the other guy's. Oh, now I'm getting myself confused. Right. It was going to be for the other guy's money.
Right.
And now we turn around and he says, you know what? I've got an animal. Maybe you'd like this animal because I don't need it. And I heard you need one. And he's like, okay, great, fine. But that's now a new transaction because now that's exchanging the money that I didn't yet give you, but which I owe you. And we agree that's the other half of this transaction. So now I'm going to effectively take that back, effectively, not technically, effectively take that back and give you an animal instead. But it's really another transaction. I'm buying one animal, you're buying the other animal because it wasn't decided on in advance. If it's decided in advance, it wouldn't be a problem.
But the verbal exchange here is not simultaneous. When he started this whole conversation, he started off to buy something, not to exchange something. And later on, there's another conversation that says, "Oh, well, we're in the middle of this, but I'd like to, I'll accept your bicycle for the equivalent."
Right, but it was
So
after that
the argument to say
right.
that it's two separate things can be justified because the conversation was two separate things by two different people, not simultaneously. That's why I asked the question earlier, does there have to be a gap between one part getting changed to the other part? Somehow there has to be conversations by both of them, which were not happened at the beginning of this whole episode.
Right.
That's why I would argue Michael's case the same way. And we missed you last Sunday, Michael, because there was a lot of Michael questions last week that not asked.
I was at the cemeteries in Connecticut. I'm sorry.
Right. So Michael, before we get to the discussion of the word kone, and I want to put that on hold because you're really touching on something. What Rabbi Yochanan means when he says mos, dvar Torah, mos konos, he means to say money is kone bechalipin. Forget about the word kone. You're asking a good question, and that question will be touched upon. But when Rav Nachman holds like Rabbi Yochanan, and he says Devar Torah, the Midoraisa, Mos Konos, he means Mos Konos bechalipin, that money is acquired through chalipin. That's what he means. That's what Rabbi Yochanan means when he says the word Mos Konos, that money can be acquired through chalipin. Accept that for the minute, because your question will be addressed. It says kone, and kone means what it means a sale. But that's not what Rabbi Yochanan means. Rabbi Yochanan, when he says Devar Torah, Mos Konos, he means money can be acquired in chalipin. So if Rav Nachman is holding like Rabbi Yochanan, that money can be acquired in chalipin, then this whole exchange between the shore, the owner of the shore and the owner of the chamor is really telling us, sure, I can exchange a shore of a chamor, and that's chalipin, but I can even exchange shore for money, which then becomes a chamor, and that's chalipin. Why? Because money can be used for chalipin. I don't have to go through this ruse. I can do a straight shore for money, and it's chalipin, and then money for a chamor, and it's chalipin. I can do that because money is a item that can be used in chalipin. So in a sort of way, we're scratching our left ear with our right hand unnecessarily, because we're trying to say that we're doing this sort of sleight of hand. Sure, for money, no, not money, chamor. Therefore, money is chalipin. Rabbi Yochanan says, in effect, you don't have to do that. You can do shore for money, that's chalipin, and you can do para or chamor for money, and that's chalipin. You don't have to do the ruse, because money itself is an item that can be used for chalipin. It's just that Rav Nachman wants to show it in one event, so he says, the Mishnah there says that if you exchange shore for chamor, I'm going to tell you that that's okay, because even though you're exchanging shore for chamor, you're really exchanging shore for money, which turns into a chamor. But obviously, Michael, that you don't like that, because it does smack of some kind of a ruse. So the Gemara tells us, but you know what? Don't worry about it, because Rav Nachman's on solid ground because he holds like Rabbi Yochanan, who says outright you can use money for chalipin. You yesh mo yesh what does he say? Devar Torah mos konos, that money can be konem b'chalipin. And Rashi says, my Talmud Rav Nachman, second wide line on the second part of the Rashi, the Omed Domim, he says money ki hai gavna in such a fashion kona. It's kind of b'chalipin. The ain tanan mos einakonos, and we don't say mos einakonos. So he holds shavalok Rabbi Yochanan, la'omer lakamon. Rabbi Yochanan says in our Gemara later, devar Torah mos konosh, that money can be acquired b'chalipin. Ida ashkon gabi kona min ha'hegdish she'amar Torah v'nosna kesef v'kamlo. Where by hegdish it says he gives money and v'kamlo, and it becomes his. Well, how does it become his? If you're going to say that money isn't kona, how does it become his? He has to make a kinyan on the hektish. He hasn't made the kinyan on the hektish, right? The answer is that because you can make an exchange of hegdish for money, therefore, once you give the money, the hegdish becomes yours. So therefore, and in that particular case, Rabbi Yochanan says that's chalipin. That is chalipin, that you can exchange money for hegdish. You're not buying it, you're exchanging it for money. Okay, so now, Michael, again, you have a valid kasha because you're asking about the word kona, and kona implies a purchase. It implies a purchase. Rabbi Yochanan is telling us, no, that for my interpretation, kona means chalipin. Now, let's just finish the thought. But if we're making this comment, my omer mashicha kona, then why do we need the mashicha? If money is kona, then why are we going through this elaborate sort of example of that you have to make a mashicha? Why have to make a mashicha? If money is kona, automatically money is kona, you don't need a mashicha. That goes back now, gezerah, we're making a gezerah, shema yomalo nisrifu chatecha ba'aliyah. So now we're worried, like we said before, that if there's a monetary exchange, I sell you for money, and the item is still in your rishus, and there's a fire, I'm out of luck, because money is kona, I automatically acquired the grain or whatever it was that I was buying, and then there's a fire and the grain gets destroyed, and you say to me, sorry, it's yours. You should have immediately come and take it. You didn't take it. There was a fire. It's tough luck. And that would be a valid answer if money is kona. That's the reason why the Rabbanan, the rabbis, came and said, you know what? Even though Minat Torah mos kona, the money can be, you can make an exchange. Chalipin. Remember, a purchase is one thing. Chalipin is something else. If we were to, and I know this is hard to sort of grasp, Michael, because we've discussed it. If you were to tell me that I'm using the money for a purchase, then the owner of the grain, the new owner of the grain, doesn't take a loss because he still has to make a kinyan in a purchase. But we're calling money chalipin, and once we call money chalipin, that means the flip side, the grain is automatically belongs to the other guy. That's why we have the problem of, and that's what this gezerah comes to address, because that grain, if it burns, is going to be a loss for the fellow who never made the kinyan. He never took it over because it was an automatic kinyan. So now what we have is two transactions. I'm buying grain from you. I'm buying. It's a purchase. Buying grain from you. I give you money. I haven't yet taken the grain. The grain gets burned. You take the loss, not me. I give you money, and the money is chalipin, and I don't take the grain, and the grain gets burned. My loss. Same transaction, but if the money was a purchase, then it's not my loss because I haven't made a kinyan. But if I call it chalipin, even though I haven't made a kinyan, it's my loss. That's the chilik now, which we've been saying all along, is the difference between using money for a purchase or money for chalipin. And according to Rabbi Nachman, you really can use money for chalipin, but there was a gezerah made. There was a gezerah made that you shouldn't do it because of the risk of loss. But underlying, he does say that money can be used for chalipin, but we don't do it.
Rabbi, I have a question. In the case of an exchange, let's say it's a true exchange, can there be a condition placed on it until possession is taken and still be considered an exchange?
No, because by definition, an exchange doesn't have that condition that you want to point out. That's exactly what a chalipin is coming to undo is the need for a physical exchange. That's exactly
But the problem is that if it's a
chalipin.
purchase with a contingency to buy, I'm going to pay you money. Let's say it's a pure purchase. I'm going to pay you, but I don't have the money with me right now.
Right.
But now I've taken it over.
Have I made the kinyan on the item?
Yeah, I've made the kinyan on the item,
Right.
but it's still remaining in your possession,
Right.
in the seller's possession.
Right.
You can't have a condition that until the money is exchanged and I will take possession and it be a purchase.
Well, that will give rise to a question of whether you can make a kinyan almanas, when you can make a kinyan with conditions. And that's okay. We're going to address that's a separate question.
That's later,
right? I mean, the almanas portion, the conditional portion is, so you're telling me you're going to make a kinyan, right? You're going to make a kinyan, which by definition means it's yours, but almanas, that the money changes hands. You can't do that because either you make the kinyan and it's yours. A kinyan is an absolute thing. So you can't say I'm making a kinyan, but it's not really mine until something else happens, because what's the point of the kinyan? The kinyan is supposed to be an absolute.
So chalipin means that both sides have taken possession at that point.
One side has taken actual possession and one side doesn't need to take actual.
But it's constructive possession.
It's as if they took possession, yes.
It's constructive possession. So if something happens at the exchange,
correct.
The correct. Transaction's completed.
Correct. That's why the Chazal, when the Amoraim, as they were interpreting the Mishnah, that's why they were so careful to say, how is this money being transacted? And that was the whole point of our Gemara for the last few blocks, is we're trying to sort of figure out, can money be part of this transaction where you don't call it a purchase, but you call it a chalipin. And we have until now completely eviscerated that whole notion. Comes Rav Nachman and says, no, there is a way of interpreting that money can be chalipin, because I hold like Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan says, midoraisa, money can be exchanged in chalipin. It's only the rabbis who came to make this siyag, to make this condition, this gezerah. We're calling it the gezerah. The gezerah, that if you're going to allow money to be chalipin, and the fellow takes the money and the other guy doesn't take the produce, then he's exposed, that his produce can be damaged and he's going to take the loss, even though he didn't physically acquire it, only constructively. So therefore, we're protecting him by saying, no, we're not going to allow money to do that. Now, you may ask a question. Why is this different than physical item for physical item? And that's, I think, that question, Rick, or someone asked that question. What happens, or maybe you did, Michael, shore for a chamor, forget about money. I'm giving you my shore, you're giving me your chamor. Once you take the shore and make a kinyan, I own the chamor. But the chamor is still in your possession. Right. So what happened? The chamor dies. Tough luck. Right? It's mine. Now, if the chamor if it was to be an accident that you're responsible for, then of course you have to replace that chamor for. So we're making a very profound distinction that when it comes to exchanging items, then the risk does transfer from the original owner of that item to the new owner, even though it's not in his possession. We're making that statement. We're saying that, yeah, that risk transfers, but we're not going to allow it with money because money is it's too porous, it's too risky. With an item, for some reason, I mean, you can make the same argument that there should be the same risk with an item as it is with money. You can definitely make that argument, but the Gemara is telling us that our argument is not as strong if it's item for item as it is for monetary money for item. And that's just the way Chazal looked at it. As a practical means, I would agree with you. On practical terms, if I'm exchanging an item for an item, and one side makes the kinyan, and the other side doesn't make the kinyan, and the side that doesn't make the kinyan then has a loss of that item, he suffers the loss. You may ask, why should he suffer the loss? It's the same problem as it was before. Same problem as it was before. Why should he suffer it, right? That's the nuance here that we have to accept, is that in a chalipin there isn't we don't consider it the same degree of risk as we do with a monetary exchange. So now, okay, so having said all of that, let's just go one step further so we can continue. He says, "Can Rabbi Yochanan devar Torah mos kolos mipnei ma'or mishicha kona gizera shemayom lo nisru chatecha ba'aliyah." Okay, so now the final piece of this is umilsa the shchicha gos Rabbi Rabbanan. Milsa the lo shlicha lo goes Rabbi Rabbanan. What does that mean? In other words, we're saying that something that is shchiach, that is common, right? Something that is common, then goes Rabbi Rabbanan. The rabbis were gozer. Milsa the lo shlicha lo goes Rabbi Rabbanan. So in a what's a milcha de shchicha? So a milcha de shchicha, we say, is a case of dumbing money for an item. So in the case of money for an item, that's the normal course. Milcha de shchicha, then the rabbis were gozer, and they said you can't use money for chalipin because of the problem that I said, the fire, that there will be a fire. But milsa de lo shchicha, what does milsa de lo shchicha? Milsa de lo shchicha mean the exact example we gave, a hashor for a chamor, using money as that item that you're flipping for the chamor. That's milsa de lo shchicha. That's not the common way of making a transaction. Meaning, I'm selling you my shor, and you're going to give me money, but you flip it into a chamor. That's not the normal way of transaction. That, says the Gemara, because it's not the normal way of transaction, the rabbis did not make a gezerah. They didn't make a gezerah. What does it mean they didn't make a gezerah? That Rabbi Yochanan, we follow Rabbi Yochanan's theory that money can be kona in chalipin. You got to follow this. In other words, if it's something that's lo shchicha, because that's not the normal way of commerce, where I'm going to sell you a shore and you're going to pay me the money, but you flip the money into a chamor. That's not normal. That's an unusual circumstance. That's milsa de lo shchicha. In a milsa de lo shchicha, we're going to allow the deraisa to stand. What is the deraisa? That money can be used for chalipin, and we're not going to insist that we follow the rabbinic prohibition because of the gezerah. So what comes out from this is that according to Rav Nachman, this example of shor b'chamor is an example of where money can be used for chalipin because of what we're saying, this ruse or the sleight of hand. And he says it's acceptable because Rabbi Yochanan who is a Tana, says, Rabbi Yochanan says that I can abide by it. And why can I abide by it? Because it's a milshul de lo shchicha. It's not, the rabbis only were gozer for things that were normal occurrences. But this example of the sleight of hand is not a normal occurrence. And because of that, we're going to allow it to be a chalipin. So the upshot of this Gemara is that in a very narrow window, according to Rav Nachman, if you make this exchange of shor b'chamor, but it was going to be shor for damin, and then the damin, the money turned into a chamor, we're going to allow that. We're going to call that chalipin according to Rav Nachman. Now, others don't hold like it, but according to Rav Nachman, we're going to call it chalipin, and we're not going to say it falls into the gezerah. Maybe it'll do. If in other words, if you're giving him money, the whole purpose of not using money for chalipin is because of the gezerah. Maybe it'll burn or something will happen. He says that doesn't happen here because we're going to consider this chalipin with that unusual twist. So that's what we're left with. It's, I know, Michael, totally unsatisfactory because at the same time, we're splitting hairs here and we're saying that money is being used for chalipin, but it's not really. It seems like a sale, and I don't disagree with you. It seems like a sale, but specifically Rav Nachman, who's a yochid, holding like Rabbi Yochanan, in a not normal case, milshad lo shchicha, that will be the example of chalipin. You know what that is? That's what we call a svek faker. That means it's a suffix upon a suffix. So we're not goyrus that way. Don't think that that's not the halacha. But if you wanted to hang your hat on one amora who in one specific circumstance finds an example where money is chalipin, this is it. So you have to say this is an anomaly on top of an anomaly, and we don't want to get bent out of shape by saying, but how can it be? Because that's not the norm. The norm is that money is money. It's not chalipin for all the reasons we give. But in this one circumstance, with this little dray, this little twist, we're finding a way to say that money is chalipin. Now, who's satisfied with that? Probably no one but Rav Nachman, because everybody else is going to be like you, Michael. What are you talking about? How do you tell me that money is a chamor and a chamor is chalipin, therefore the money is chalipin? That's kind of like gewalt, right? But again, I'm making the point that it's Rav Nachman as a yochid who's finding a way to hang his hat. He is satisfied with it. Nobody else is. Nobody else is satisfied that that's a valid portion. But if you were to ask me, is there a man the Omar who says that money can be used for chalipin? The answer is Rav Nachman in a particular case where it's a milsa de lo shchicha, i.e. donkey, shore, exchange, money. That's way out there. But yes, that's an example of money for chalipin. So that's how we have to leave it for now. And we're going to pick up okay, so we're going to go in another direction. But at least for now, we have found a little loophole in everything we've said, which is what? That money can't be used for chalipin, cannot. We found a little loophole according to Rav Nachman in this particular circumstance where it's milsa de lo shchicha. And again, like I said, that's a svek faker. That's like, when we say a svek faker, we mean, yeah, it's a suffix, but then there's another suffix. So at the end of the day, we don't really hold from svek fakers because it's too far out there. So this is a little bit far out there, but I want to emphasize that while that's not the psak or the halacha, it is a way of justifying in a particular circumstance that money is used for chalipin. So I mean that's what we take away from all this Gemara today, is that it can happen under a particular circumstance, but it's sort of very narrow window. So with that, we have to sort of contemplate that. But again, the Gemara, it isn't about halacha here. I mean, yes, at the time, Rav Nachman, they were all poskim. Rav Sheshes, you held with Rav Sheshes, you held with Rav Nachman, whatever. Of course, we know, bringing it closer to our generation, that these discussions are philosophical discussions, but Al pi halacha, this doesn't apply because halacha is different. So we're not worried about that. We're thinking of the Shakla Mataria and the whole, what we call Talmudic exegesis of understanding what goes behind it. So even if you have a Manda Omar who's a minority, in a minority case, it still is valid because I mean, you have Rav Nachman was a tremendous Amora. He was one that we had to reckon with. And if he holds like that, then it's like Beshara Beis Hillel. We say the house of Shammai is a powerful force. We don't hold like that. But we don't denigrate them, but we still, we don't hold like that. So Rav Nachman's view is a minority, a narrow minority, but it's there. That's what we have to take away, that it's there, and we can't ask more kashas because there's nothing to ask. That's his view. All right.
Eshkach, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Shkoyach. Shkoyach.